So Adam DePetris, one of our poets, gave me a copy of Ali Smith's novel, Autumn. And in this novel is a discussion of 1960s pop art, most accounts of which include no women, and maintain that there were no women pop artists. But the novel's protagonist, in writing her dissertation, comes to understand that the language of critical reception could not or would not allow for what the art of women pop artists brought into the arena. Here's a passage from Autumn. She was wearing a bright blue top. Her hair was the color of corn. But you can't write that in a dissertation. You can't write, she made it look like a blast. You can't write, she looked like she was really good fun, like she was full of energy, or energy comes off her in waves. You can't write, even though it's a lot more like the language expected, you can't write, though she's in that film for less than 20 seconds, she adds something crucial and crucially female about pleasure to its critique of the contemporary new and liberated ethos, which was indeed what she was also doing with her aesthetic. So that's the end of that quote, but you can't write that. So I open with that passage instead of the Wikipedia page about Whitney Otto, because Whitney has often created forums, novels, by which the art of women can be apprehended, and apprehended for what it is and contributes. Whitney has turned the table and basically maintained through several books of hers that the criticism does not and cannot control what is seen in women's art. It shouldn't control what is seen in anyone's art. But if the art of so many women for so many years was disappeared by language, by critical lexicons that would not countenance unruly art, art that didn't obey, then the lexicons had to go, not the art. That to me is who Whitney Otto is. And we welcome her back to UC Irvine, to the programs in writing, where she wrote much, or at least some, of her first book, How to Make an American Quilt, the first of Whitney's in-your-face titles. All of Whitney's titles dare you to dismiss the books as girlish frivolity, as estrogen besotted, and thus dairy, something advisable to remove from one's diet. 8 girls taking pictures, a collection of beauties at the height of their popularity, the Passion Dream Book, and the particularly challenging title of her second novel, Now You See Her, which dares your ear to finish the phrase, now you see her, now you don't, but keeps you pinned on seeing her. Oh, you will see her if Whitney Otto has anything to do with this, though the novel is about disappearing, about how easily we just slip into, now you don't. How accepted, the end of the phrase, of course, just what happens, the game we play with children. But Whitney's novel writes the cost of our ease with disappearing, with language that just falls off our tongues as though that's just the way of the world, just how things are. So all of Otto's titles, the 5 novels, this new autobiography through art, all of these titles say, you think this is girl talk? Oh, not quite. And this is because Otto's language allows for all that is there in the story and in the art. Her language doesn't start with the art because her language pauses long before she chooses what that language will be, how that language will accommodate the narrative, the art. That is a difference worth noting. There's a striking passage in the section on Madame Yvonne titled, Be Original or Die. And the passage ends with this sentence. Sometimes a feminist doesn't look like a feminist, and it means nothing that you can't recognize her. The only image in Art for the Ladylike is the cover, a very famous photograph by Grete Stern. And what Whitney is going to do today is show us a lot of the images that have lived with her, in her, as she's written her work, and even before she started writing. I think we'll have a little time for questions, but certainly a huge question I had was the decision, or perhaps necessity, not to include any images of the art discussed in the book. Are permissions just that exorbitant? Has capitalism just out and out won against the creation of art now and in the future? But before all of that, let's welcome Whitney and listen to her talk about this art that has meant so much to her and which she gives us the language to see it, I think, more purely. So welcome,
Whitney, I'm so happy you're back.
Thank you, Michelle. I know. Thank you so much for having me here. It's so, I can't tell you the pleasure of being back at UCI. And thank you, Julia. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, all of you. And yes, it's too exorbitant to reproduce. And that's kind of the shortest answer there. And it's really a shame. Fortunately, we have the internet. And this evening you have the slideshow, so you'll see some of it. But yeah, so anyway, so I'll get started. And thank you so much for this introduction. You made me feel like I'm so important. But anyways, I'm gonna, okay. I'll move over to the slideshow.
Okay.
Okay. Can you see this?
Not yet. You need to share screen.
Okay, that's the problem. Okay, let me find
Take your time.
my sharing thing. Okay. How about now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So is this going to stay on top? No. Okay. So this book is Art for the Ladylike, and it's an autobiography through other lives. The book is many things. I do feel it's my autobiography in that these are women who have been very influential for me from a very, very young age. And part of what, and it's not that I only like photographers, although the spine of this book is these 8 women photographers. There are other artists that are mentioned in it. There's movies, there's books, there's other things mentioned in the book. But one of the dilemmas that I was feeling was being a woman in a creative field and trying to figure out how you pull together art, family, friends, you know, sort of all these things. And that's one way that it's sort of about that. Another way, another thing that's about is I did write a novel called 8 Girls Taking Pictures, which came out quite a few years ago. And it's a fictional handling of these same 8 women photographers. Well, 2 of the women photographers in the novel are fictional, but their work is based on real work. So I wanted to do a fictional treatment and a nonfiction treatment of the same source material, but the books do stand alone. So you wouldn't have to read one to read the other. But as you know, if you're a writer, there's just certain pleasures and certain limitations for whatever sort of genre you choose. And so I kind of wanted to explore both. So it's sort of like a diptych, I guess, a literary diptych. And also it's about how art functions in our lives. It shouldn't be something where we go into a museum and we feel intimidated, or we're really not sure, what does it mean, or, you know, that it's something apart from us. It's really a part of us, and it's woven into our lives. And if you even look around you, you'll see things that are artistic and creative all the time. And I don't think that we should think of these things as really separate from who we are and what we do. And finally, the book, again, going back to the idea of autobiography, is that I think we are the things we love. We are the things that influence us and that matter to us. So that's my intro. And I'm going to just start by showing the slideshow and seeing the 8 photographers. Let's see. Okay, so this is a quote that comes up. It's originally from Imogen Cunningham. They tell you the important pictures are taken on the battlefield, and then they ban you from the battlefield. This is Sally Mann. She's an American photographer. She was born in 1951 in Virginia, and she does some controversial work. She also does work with antique cameras and fractured lenses, which she really likes. She's really, really interesting. But the reason, and I should say too, even though this book has biography in it about these women, it's not biography. That is, there's so much more to say about them than I'll say right here or that you would see in the book. What I did is I sort of mined their lives for what really influenced me and what really resonated for me. So Sally Mann in 1992 published a book called Immediate Family, and it was photographs of her children taken at this rustic cabin that she and her husband have in Virginia. And it's kids at play and enjoying their lives. And I'll show you one of those pictures. This is one. This is called New Mothers, 1984. And these are her 2 daughters. She also had a son. And you can see the little girl's got her candy cigarette, and the other one's got sort of like Lolita glasses on. And they're very kind of adult and world weary. The thing about this collection is that they were very, very controversial because some of the pictures were nudes. Very few of them are actually, but also you saw kids at play, but you also saw them with bug bites or, you know, small injuries or upending games or running around naked, but it's, or on a urine soaked mattress. And so it really is sort of a, a full image of childhood, but it's also an image for me of motherhood. And I had a son in 1992, still have him. But it was very hard for me as a mother to find images or ideas about motherhood that meant something to me, that resonated for me. And Sally Mann did that for me because she shows motherhood sort of and childhood in sort of all its complexity. And the idea too, that she was a creative woman at home and began to use her children as models, but she is always very quick to say they were complicit in this. She wasn't just photographing them around the corner. They would, you know, be part of her art. Oops, sorry. Okay, so this is Ruth Orkin, and Ruth Orkin was born in 1921. This is her centennial in Boston, but she was really raised in Los Angeles. Her mother was connected to the film industry there. Her father made these toy boats, which are really collectible now, and she became interested in photography at a very early age. This is a picture of her when she's 17, and she gets on this little bike and she rides from Los Angeles to New York on this little bike by herself at age 17, and she records it. And in her life, and very, very quickly, she becomes like a ship's photographer. She travels around to Israel, to Europe. She photographs famous people like Einstein, but also a lot of celebrities like Brando, or writers like Carson McCullers or Ethel Waters. She also, when she comes back, she ends up getting married in her late 30s to a man named Morris Engel, and they make this film together called The Little Fugitive, 1953. And Francois Truffaut said that this is the film that kicked off French New Wave. It gets nominated for an Oscar, and they make 2 more films after that. But this one she's very active in. The next one, she's only helps with the screenplay, and the third one, she's not a part of at all. Partly because by the second one, she has a child. By the third one, she has 2 kids. This is her most famous image, which is American Girl in Italy, 1951. This is another image like Sally Mann that's very controversial because you see this young woman who called herself Jinx Allen. She was a 24-year-old art student that Ruth Orkin happened to be in the same hotel with when Ruth was coming back from Israel. And this young woman had saved her money and was now traveling around Europe by herself. And they decide to do this series called A Woman Traveling Alone. So she sees Jinx walk through these men and then says, stop, do it again, and asks the men to sort of do what they were doing. So it's kind of a setup picture, but also not a setup. It is very spontaneous. But part of the controversy on it is the one man who's cradling his crotch. And also there are women who find this woman to be afraid. They look at her face and they think they see fear. When it was published in Life magazine, there were a number of feminists who really took exception to it. And Jinx Allen has come out many, many times and said, I was having a great time. This was the time of my life. It was wonderful. Now, for me, as a young woman, when I first saw this in my teens, I loved it because for me, it looked like a photograph of absolute possibility. The idea that you could just wander the streets of Florence, that you would be taking art classes or carrying a little feed bag. And she, even though this is 1951, she doesn't look like the 1950s. And here's Ruth Orkin later. So now she's home with the kids. She's 40 plus. And she begins taking pictures of Central Park. And she takes pictures of Central Park for 25 years. And she takes pictures of all the people in the park and when the park is empty and all the different seasons, times of day, protests, parties, picnics. And she publishes 2 books called The World Through My Window, and then, you know, more pictures from the world through my window. She also said that she can't imagine anyone but a housewife could have gotten all this done. She had never wanted to be the kind of photographer who's in place and taking pictures, because she's also done street photography. But this is how it was for her, because like Mann, who made her children models, she sort of made the world outside her window, the park, her model. And I'll show you just some of those pictures. So there's one. And I just think, I love the concept of it. And again, it goes back to the idea of what do you do when you're a creative woman at home. So this is Imogen Cunningham. And she was born in 1883 in Portland, Oregon, but grew up in Seattle. And her father was very progressive. He moved them to a commune for a while. He was vegetarian. He was not progressive where women were concerned, but he was progressive where Imogen was concerned. She was one of 10 kids. She was the first person in her family to get a college degree, which she got from the University of Washington in chemistry. Even though she was already interested in photography, you couldn't major in photography at that time. And her father did build her a dark room, although he did say to her, I don't know why you want to be a dirty photographer. And she said when she got married and had children, she always felt like she had sort of like one hand in the dishpan and sort of, you know, one hand in photography. I should say also, she worked in Edward Curtis's studio. She got married when she was 29 to a man named Roy Partridge, who was also an artist, not a photographer. And he was traveling through Italy. They kind of had their courtship by letters, and then they ended up getting married. She was pregnant and taking pictures of him. When he came back to the States because of World War I, she ended up taking pictures of him in the nude while she was pregnant with their first child. And the pictures were shown, and they were very controversial again, and they weren't shown again for decades. And she always sort of jokingly says, you might say, I invented the male nude. And here she is. This is a self-portrait right outside the University of Washington when she was 23 years old. I love this picture because as a young woman, again, I completely related to this picture, not because I was naked at UCI or anything like that, but just because she's so young, everything is so possible, and she's embarking on a career path which kind of isn't really defined yet for anybody in a sense. Although I should say at this point that there were women in photography from the very beginning, but being in it was very different than having the same opportunities within this profession. This is one of her botanicals, and she's known for a lot of things. She took a lot of pictures, again, of celebrities, like she did a whole series of Martha Graham. She took some pictures of her kids, but she ended up with 3 kids. She was a faculty wife. Her husband taught at Mills College, and she was home a lot. He would sort of go off on these artistic forays where he would, etch, and she would be home, and a lot of times she was in her garden. So she took a lot of botanicals, and it is one of the things that she's known for. This is called false hellebore, and I'm trying to think of the date of this one. This is 1926. But again, like Sally Mann, who used her children as models, Ruth Orkin, who photographed the city because she was stuck at home, she photographed plants. So each of these things are sort of a way of showing motherhood without showing children. This is Unmade Bed, 1957. I love this picture because it tells a story. It's very narrative, but also not quite. When I wrote 8 Girls Taking Pictures, the character who's sort of based on Imogen Cunningham takes this picture in that chapter, only in her case, it's a hotel room in Berlin in 1910 with a man she's in love with who she finds out is gay, which is very different than the original meaning of the picture. And this is one of the things I like about photography is we can recognize an image, but we don't always know what the image fully means if we don't have the context around it. And then you have to wonder, does the context around it matter? Is photography something that's really flexible and really malleable? So this is Edward Weston and his mistress of 10 years, Margaretta Mather, who was also a photographer in her own right. This is a picture taken by Imogen, and Edward Weston, Ansel Adams, Imogen, and a few other photographers started a group called F64, which is a way of taking sort of the painterly idea of photography out of photography and using natural light, more simple images. And Weston at this time was married with 4 sons. He had a little studio in what is now Glendale, and he just sort of had this kind of suburban studio. Margaret Mather was also a photographer. She was also most likely sometimes a prostitute. She would kind of come and go as she pleased, and she was pretty much gay, except at times, which was her relationship, of course, with Weston. And her photography, if you see it, is very, very modernist, a lot of patterns, a lot of objects. And it's said that he was very influenced by her. And here's another picture in that series. I just find this series really beautiful. Okay, so this is Tina Modotti. And Tina Modotti was born in Italy in 1896 to a family that was large, poor, and very, very politically engaged. She grew up partly in Austria. They came back to Italy. Her father ended up emigrating to San Francisco, and one by one, he brought the family over. When she got to San Francisco, her 2 older sisters were there. She became involved in local theater in San Francisco, the Italian theater, and she also modeled. And she met this man who called himself Robo de Richet. I'm not going to get the name right. He kept changing it. Who was originally from Oregon. And she becomes Madame de Richet. They go down to Los Angeles, and she becomes a silent screen actress. But the only parts she gets are sort of the fiery, like Italian mistress who, never gets married, not the good girl, kind of the bad girl. And Robo does a lot of batik, and they live in this one apartment building where they have sort of a salon, artistic salon. They have all these friends who are also kind of political, although Robo is not political at all. And that's how she meets Edward Weston, who you just saw. And they begin an affair like immediately. She decides that she's going to go to Mexico because Robo goes to Mexico. And at this time in Mexico in the 1920s, it's very much in some ways like being in Paris in the 20s or Harlem in the 20s or Greenwich Village. It's a lot of artists, intellectuals, writers, and people who are very involved in politics, usually communism. And also there's kind of a political flowering that's going on there at that time. So she's going to go down there and meet Robo, only he ends up dying before she can get there. And Weston decides he's going to go with her. And his wife says, that's fine, but you got to take one of the kids with you. So he takes one of the boys with him. They end up in Mexico City. They open up a studio, and she becomes not just his muse and his model, but his apprentice. This is one of her pictures that I love. A lot of the pictures she took, again, were very modernist, telegraph lines, glass doors. She also took a lot of pictures of Mexican people. She adored Mexico. She loved everything about it. And she was also very, very politically engaged, which Edward Weston was not. That was one of the ways they sort of parted company. She didn't believe in marriage. She didn't believe in necessarily being faithful. This drove him crazy. He said, next time I'm going to get this ugly mistress. She had this sort of reputation as this great beauty. But I love this picture because I like what she does with the roses. I like how they're sort of crushed and shoved into this frame. And I like how they're not sentimental. And this is one of her political pictures. She did a lot of like sombreros, hammer and sickle, sometimes with stalks of corn. And I think this is just a great picture. So here's one of the nudes he took of her. He took a lot of nudes of her in Los Angeles and in Mexico. And this is on this azotea that they had where they lived. These nudes came back to bite her later. But I want to show you this one because I wanted you to see this one. Okay, this is Tina Modotti as a model depicted in the chapels at Chapingo in Mexico. This is by Diego Rivera. And Diego Rivera did these, painted these murals in this chapel, which is sort of considered like the Sistine Chapel of the Americas. He painted her roughly 5 times in this chapel, and they had this affair for a year. His wife at that time says that's what broke up the marriage. But you can see the difference. I mean, not the difference, but you see the similarity to the picture that Weston took of her. And now this is our friend Imogen Cunningham again. She did a series of pictures of a young woman called Phoenix. This is called Navajo Rug, and it was taken in 1968. But I wanted to include it because, again, you can see the similarity between Chipingo, which was done, I'm sorry, I need to get my dates right on this, 1926, and then the pictures that Weston took of her just before that. And I like the way that, in a sense, her image sort of crosses continents and time. This is Julio Antonio Mea. He was born in Cuba and he was a revolutionary. He ends up in Mexico. He meets Tina. They have this really combustible affair. They're very sexy and revolutionary, and she's very, very involved with the Communist Party. By this time, Edward Weston has gone back to the States, and then he returns again several months later with yet a different son, and then he ends up leaving for good. And so she's with Mea. She adores him, and he ends up a couple of years into their relationship getting assassinated in the streets of Mexico one evening late at night when he's walking with Tina through the streets. This is another mural by Diego Rivera. It's called Distributing Arms. And this was done in 1928. The character in the center, or the figure in the center, is, oh my God, Frida Kahlo, as if, okay, but it's the lower right-hand corner that's really interesting to me, because that's Tina Modotti. She's gazing up longingly at her lover, Mea, and behind that is a man named Vidali, who is an assassin and an operative of the Communist Party. And their story, well, you'll have to read about their story in my book. Anyways, they have an interesting story. And this is also, this mural is the thing that breaks up for good the friendship of Diego Rivera and Tina Modotti. This is Lee Miller. This picture was taken by Man Ray. Lee Miller was born in 1907 in Poughkeepsie, New York. Now this picture looks like this because of a thing called solarization. And what happens when a picture is solarized, you're developing it in the darkroom and some light leaks into the darkroom and it creates this effect. And she says that he discovered it. He sort of says, we discovered it. So it's kind of a mutual thing. Supposedly she was developing film in the darkroom and a mouse ran across her foot and this light came in. Now she's someone who has a life that is so extraordinary. It's like a great novel. She becomes a fashion model. She ends up going to Paris. She introduces herself to Man Ray. This is in 1929. He says, I'm your new assistant. And he says, I don't take assistants and I'm leaving town. And she says, I'm going with you. They end up together for a few years. And like Tina Modotti, she becomes his muse and his lover, but also his apprentice. And this is how she learns to take pictures. And here's one of her pictures when she was a fashion model. And she's considered a very great beauty. And I'm going to stop right here and say, all these women had fathers that were very progressive toward their daughters. Now, they may not be progressive toward women in general, but they were with their daughters. And it wasn't because they thought their daughters were surrogate sons. That wasn't it at all. But they were very supportive of what they wanted to do. Now, she had, and I should say all the fathers were different. Some of them came from money, some did not, and they all had different relationships with their daughters. The relationship she had with her father was, how can I say this? It was very, very close. And there's a lot of conjecture about her relationship with her father, but they remained fairly inseparable until his death. This is one of her pictures. I have to say, I fell in love with Lee Miller because I thought she was really beautiful. So in my teens, I saw her and I thought she's so gorgeous. I just couldn't stop looking at her. But I didn't know she was a photographer until much later in my life. And I don't think she's the greatest photographer, I should say that. But she's interesting to me nonetheless. And this is one of my favorite pictures of her. And it's called Exploding Hand. This is a door of a perfume shop in Paris. And it's all beaten up like that on the glass from the diamond rings of the women opening the door. So Lee Miller is kind of she's a darling in her time, in her 20s. She is painted by Picasso numerous times. Joseph Cornell makes images of her. Jean Cocteau films her. And of course, Man Ray photographs her over and over and has a lot of trouble with jealousy where she's concerned. Now, Lee Miller doesn't believe in jealousy or monogamy, in part because she had something happen to her as a child, and her parents, their way of dealing with it was to take her to a psychiatrist in Manhattan and to teach her that love and sex are completely different. So, for example, if she was living with someone and she had to leave town, she would say, find someone to take my place, I'll be back. And she never felt any kind of jealousy, as I said. So when World War II comes along, she's now living with the man she eventually marries, one of them, and this young man named David Sherman, who's an American. And she really wants to film the war, but there aren't really women who are war photographers. She does end up over on the continent, and she ends up with this guy, David Sherman, who'd been living with her and her almost husband. And they start going across Europe, and they're there when they're liberating the camps. And I didn't want to show any of her concentration camp pictures, but they're very, very graphic. And the thing that's really important to know about them is there's no telephoto lens. So everything you see, she is on top of. And David Sherman, who was also a photojournalist, said he couldn't believe that she could get up so close because a lot of people just couldn't do it. She also was writing dispatches and taking pictures for British Vogue, which is called Brogue. And it was really amazing. You'd have these concentration camp photos, and then you'd have like an ad for perfume, or you'd have fashion photos. And this is one of the things that she did during the war. This picture is important because this is Hitler's apartment in Munich. And she and David Sherman talked their way into the apartment. And she said in this picture, which David Sherman's taking of her, she washed off the dirt of Dachau. And the other thing that's interesting about this picture is that this picture was taken right when Hitler was committing suicide. The phones were still live in the apartment. And she also said, artist that she was, that there was no art in the apartment, and it looked like someone was renting it and could clear it out in 20 minutes. This is a picture by Judy Dater. Judy Dater was born in 1941 in, she was born outside Los Angeles, but she grew up in Los Angeles. And she did a book with the man who was her professor, then her husband, then her ex-husband, called Women and Other Visions. And what they decided to do, and this is in the 1970s at the height of first wave feminism, they would take pictures of the same woman, but they wouldn't say who took the picture. To sort of this idea of, can you tell if a man is taking the picture or a woman is taking the picture? And I so love the concept of this. I will say that the best pictures in this group are by her, not by him. Sometimes I think you can tell, but I think it's a really interesting experiment. And this picture is called Maria and Legend, and it's by Judy Dater, and it's in 1971. They were in Berkeley and San Francisco. So this is one of the Berkeley pictures. But I think it's really beautiful because I think it's very classic in a mother and child kind of photograph. It's kind of the way that she's dressed. It's kind of the way the child looks like the child sort of in motion. You can see there's a little bit of blur because kids are in motion, and just the way that she's dressed and the way she's looking at the camera. I just think it's a great picture. And this is her most famous image called Imogen. There's our old friend, Imogen Cunningham, yet again. Imogen and Twinka, Yosemite, 1974. You see this picture a lot. Twinka's still around. She actually lives here in Portland, Oregon. And Imogen's story basically is she was living with, she was in Seattle, and she was married to Roy. She was pregnant with twins. They had a child. He was off doing things, and they had this crazy housekeeper, and the housekeeper kept lighting the place on fire and finally destroyed Imogen's darkroom. And Imogen said, we got to go, we got to leave. And so they ended up in San Francisco. And that's when she became a faculty wife. But this picture is sort of during those San Francisco years. She never really left San Francisco again. I mean, she would go and do photographs in New York and other places, but basically this is from that sort of era. And I just love this picture. I feel it's a really great depiction of old age and youth. In many ways, it's got a real sort of tension between looking at your shoulder over approaching age, being startled by how young this woman is. So Madame Yvonne was born in London in 1893 to a well-to-do family. Her father had a factory where he made colored inks, and he sent both his daughters to very progressive schools in Belgium, and she was a suffragette from the get-go. So this is one of her self-portraits. She did a lot of very whimsical self-portraits, but the thing about Madame Yvonne is she's sort of the whimsical suffragette, and she's all about color. This is black and white, but I'll show you some color in a minute. And what attracted me to Madame Yvonne was a series she did in 1935 called The Goddesses. There's 24 pictures of aristocratic entitled women dressed like Greek goddesses, or a couple of people from myths. And it's such a great series because it shows fully the sort of like feminist whimsy that I think kind of defines Yvonne. And I really love that because it's a different way sort of approaching images of women and lives of women. And it's like not taking it seriously, but taking it very seriously. Her pictures, her color pictures are also highly saturated. She used this one lab, and she would say, don't correct the color, just keep it really saturated. But the lab closed when World War I or World War II began. So that kind of ended that. And the other thing I should say here too, again, she had a really great father who staked her in her own studio when she was 19 years old. I love that she had enough nerve to have her own studio at 19 years old. But oh God, I was gonna say something else about it. Well, I'll think of it in a second. So this is another one for self-portraits. She was married, never had children, and her husband had just died. And I love that she was a feminist, and her husband was a really difficult man. But when she registered as part of this photographic society, she registered as Mrs. Middleton. And I really like that she could sort of be both things and all things. And I think, again, as a feminist myself, that resonates for me. So this is a very biographical picture. You can see the art frame, which is sort of making a claim that her work is art. You can see the photographic plate and the glove that she's wearing and the chemicals. You can see the butterflies. A lot of her work has props in it that are really whimsical, butterflies or a stuffed cow head or glass fish. I mean, it's really wonderful. This is one of the goddesses. And this woman, she put rubber snakes around her, and then she affixed all these rhinestones to the snakes, and you can tell it's Medusa. Here it is at a distance, and you can't really see it too well, but the background is so hot pink and sparkly. I really love it. And this is Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war. And you can again see the sense of humor in it. You know, she doesn't take these things seriously, and the depiction is very, very modern. And then this one is Arithusa, and you can see that she put metal in her hair to make it look like she's underwater, and she put a little parade of glass fish across the bottom, fake flowers. This is the Queen of the Amazons. And the other thing she did with these women is she kept their makeup looking very 1930s. And a lot of times the outfits they're wearing, whether they're wearing gowns or anything, would be like $5,000 for toonie gowns, you know, during the Depression. So she's not hiding the fact that it's the 1930s. She's playing on it. And this picture is in my house. And this is called Machine Worker in the Summertime, 1937. And again, you can see the fake bird up in the corner, the fake flowers, the flowers in her hair. And she obviously has no clothes to wear. So she's really industrious and doing the housewife thing and making her clothes. But it's just yards and yards of tulle. There's no clothing to be made from this, not really. So it's sort of housewife industry without any sort of ending to the industry, I think. And also the colors are not like her usual colors. These are sort of very, almost like, like very 18th century French. This is a picture by Ellen Auerbach. And Ellen Auerbach was the professional partner of the last woman that I'm going to talk about, Grete Stern. Grete Stern was born in Germany in 1904. She was a photographer. She ended up at the Bauhaus. She met Ellen Auerbach, who became her partner professionally. They were very young. They opened up a photography studio in Germany, in Berlin. And at that time, in advertising, which is mostly what they did, they even got awards for their advertising. It was kind of moving away from doing drawn illustrations into more photography. So, and this is sort of the era of the new woman. There's sort of a flowering that happens in Berlin between 1919 and 1933 or so, and which is called the Weimar Republic, as many of you may know. And there's a moment in the middle of all this, which is really interesting artistically, but in terms of women and what they can do. And I should say too, almost all the women I've shown you have almost all worked in photography. I mean, not photography, in advertising. Most photographers can't just do one thing. So they'll do portraits, but they'll do advertising. They'll take other jobs. They'll do journalism. And this is another one by Ellen Auerbach. And so their company that they opened was called Ringle and Pitt, which were childhood names for them. And this is an interesting ad in that it's a mannequin, but if you look at the hand is a living human hand. And so with Ringle and Pitt, with Lee Miller and Madame Yvonne, they were all veering a lot towards surrealism. This was in their window. This is Ellen Auerbach and Grete Stern just sort of goofing around, and they had this in their window of their studio. So the reason why I'm including Grete Stern and why I adore her so much is the war comes, she leaves Berlin, she goes to England, she meets up with another student that she knew in Berlin at the Bauhaus, and Horatio Coppola. They end up going to Buenos Aires. He's from there originally, and they open up a studio. Buenos Aires is about 25 years behind where Berlin was in terms of film and photography and art. It's much more provincial. So while she's there, she's approached, and this is in 1948, to do photographs for a magazine called Idilio. And what they wanted to do was a column called Psychoanalysis Will Help You. The magazine was geared toward the Argentine housewife, and they had a fellow who was using a pen name. He was a sociologist, and he used the pen name of Richard Rest. And these housewives would send in their dreams, and they wanted Grete Stern to illustrate the dreams with these collages, these photo montages. And so she ended up doing this series called Sueños, which is Dreams in Spanish, from 1948 to 1951. And you can kind of see where and they're obviously highly feminist. And I'll just show you just a few and you can see why I love them. I think they are probably the greatest depiction of the anxiety of the mid-20th century housewife. And I should say too, the way she made these, sometimes there's a couple of ways to make collage, which is one, you can cut out images, piece them together, or you can go into a dark room and cover the paper at certain points, so you're sort of printing them that way. And we do have some of the originals still, but a lot of what we have are just pictures of pictures. And this is the final one. This is called Electrical Appliances for the Home. 1951. And this is, as Michelle said, the cover of my book. This is also an image that is in my novel, 8 Girls Taking Pictures. With 8 Girls Taking Pictures, I did get permissions for 8 photographs. So there are some photographs in that one. And I love that this is the cover of this book because it kind of twins with the novel. And that's it. And thank you very much. Should I stop sharing or?
Thank you, Whitney. Well, no, you should remain, or the cover can remain too.
Okay.
So, thank you. I
need to go back.
So I do invite questions to appear in the chat. If but I will pose this one to start out with, just something I was thinking about when you were talking about you Lee Miller. If I remember from your book, she's raped when she's like 7, yeah. Right? And then this. Do you think that the reason she is able to go to Auschwitz and get so close up and photograph where other people can't get near? Do you think it's because, I mean, of the psychoanalysis and this sort of attempt to then have her divide sex from love and to be able to dissociate those two things and maybe even herself from that?
I mean, I've always thought, I know that, for example, her son, who she was never close to, I should say, but I should have brought this up, is she got married again and had a child when she was age 40, but she was pretty damaged. I mean, she kind of lost her looks pretty early in her 30s, and her life really changed a lot. I think when she was in the war, I don't think she had PTSD from the war, which is what some people think. My personal opinion is she found a home in the war. Like, she liked being in a chaotic location and something that seemed very dark, chaotic. Just every day was different. There was just sort of no ground under her feet. And I think that in a way, it may have matched up with what happened to her when she was 7, because not only was she raped, he had given her venereal disease. And so she was treated for a year. And at that time, it was very, very painful, very invasive, and very, very difficult. So she had physical treatments along with these psychological treatments. So that, I mean, I don't really know what she was thinking, but that would be my guess.
Well, the sort of tenor of wartime would answer to the embattlement of her own.
Yeah, that's what I think it would be.
Yeah.
Because she really comes alive. And after the war, she's in therapy, and her psychiatrist says, we can't keep the world at war for you. And I think that really is pretty telling with her.
And she doesn't really photograph after that, right?
No. And all those, and actually her son, who again, she had a very contentious relationship with, he says he was raised by a woman named Patsy. He doesn't feel like he was raised by his mother at all. After Lee died, his wife was in the attic and found all her war photographs and the missives that she had written. He didn't even know they existed. Wow. And she just stopped. When she had a kid, she said that was it. She was done. Yeah. She became a surrealist cook. That's what she did. She was.
So, I don't think there's, anyway, if there's questions, please ask them, so, I think I've always maintained that, that marriages are hermetic and no one can see in, and no one else can say what should or should not be or what works in a relationship. And all the artists you write about, you take up their marriages and their fathers. And I think you also dare to say how these artists succeeded and how they prevailed in their art and its making. In other words, you took down the very tired narrative, oh, she would have been great if she hadn't been a woman. Mm-hmm. I think you take that very tired narrative and really say, actually, I don't think this art would exist if she wasn't a woman and if she didn't have many of these restraints.
I think so. I mean, I think that they found ways to make art with with their situations. And it's really unrealistic to think that we will live lives that allow us to just be locked away all the time until we're ready to re-enter the world. And, whether you have children or not, but you'll have lovers, you'll have friends, you'll have connection. And I think as artists, without connection, I think our art starts to sort of fade in a way, and yet we need the solitude to make the art. So we're always caught in that tension anyways. And with a mother, it's just more so because you have to really be really attentive to these kids.
Right, right. So here's a couple questions from Emily Schaff. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her last name. How do you balance fiction and nonfiction when exploring the lives of these women? It is such an interesting dynamic, and I would love to hear more about your process.
I started out with actually with something that was nonfiction, but kind of like this in the late 1990s. But I ended up thinking, oh, I've got a lot of photographers. I'm just going to narrow it down and write about this. But as I was starting to do it, I thought I really want to write about them as stories, too. And so I just told myself, I have the same source material, and now I'm lucky enough to get to do 2 different treatments of it. And so with the novel, again, I just took what I needed and took what I wanted and made up the rest. I mean, there is a lot of, invention in there. And then with the nonfiction, again, that's why I tell people, if you're really interested in these women, please go read about them and go look at their art and go do more of that. For my book, because it was autobiography, I just wanted to use what I needed to use to tell that story.
Mm-hmm. Jo Beth McDaniel asks, curious, were most of these women only children? Were there other similarities in their families, unusual mothers, for example?
No, you don't hear a lot about their mothers. And I mean, the mothers are there, but there doesn't seem to be as strong of a relationship with them. And Imogen Cunningham was one of 10. Lee Miller was the only girl of three kids. Madame Yvonne had a sister. So, and also with Tina Modotti, I think she was one of 7. So I don't think any of them were only children, actually. Well, maybe Grete Stern, she might have been the only one, come to think of it. But yeah, and just didn't have these relationships with their mothers. I mean, all of them had really interesting relationships with the fathers. And the fathers themselves are interesting because, as I said, they didn't see them as surrogate sons. And yet they were all supportive. Supportive in a world that wasn't supportive. Let me say that.
Right. And one of the questions here is, both women and art, from Jody Lorimer, both women and art have been devalued in this culture. Do you think this is changing today?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think definitely. I think like the Alice Neal show that just happened, that certainly got a lot of attention. And I think, she talks about kids and everything. And I think that, I think there's, sorry, I got something in my eye. I think there's room for sort of everything. And I think there is more interested in women, more interested in, obviously, people of color, which also has been sort of pretty underserved. And, I think there's more of a concern with the audience at this point than the artists.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because as I said at the beginning, a lot of people will shy away from art because they think, well, I don't understand it. And I think in the literary world, and you'll appreciate this, Michelle, I think that people often feel that way about poetry. I just don't get it. I don't understand it. And you just open yourself up to it and you'll realize it's in your life more than you realize that it's in your life,
I think all of your work makes that argument. To accommodate the work into you in some way, and I don't think you ever make an argument that artists' intentions don't matter, or how much is, I think you think about how much artists' intentions matter. But you do question, is it more effective when we bring ourselves to the art rather than consulting other sources and opinions?
Yeah.
You question that,
Well, it's hard. I think, yeah, I do. I think people get very intimidated and if they feel like they don't understand something. And I always say, just start with, I like it or I don't like it. And then start to examine why or what you think about that. And there's a lot of ways to look at art. I mean, you can be obviously very academic about it. You can be very scholarly, but I think just sort of letting it come into you, really. And a lot of things that I really love, I started out not liking or not understanding. I still may not understand them. I mean, but just looking, thinking, I don't like that. And whatever I don't like, I always end up revisiting because I think, wait a minute,
It's doing something to you.
Yeah.
Right. Right. It's generating some friction
Yes.
that
Yeah.
you then meet up with.
Yes. I have to kind of think about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I have a question too, because we're going to be running out of time soon. I'm really curious by a lovely presentation, and I'd love the images. And I just bought the book on Kindle so that I can read it and follow up on some of these artists' names and stories, especially those Greek goddesses, because I'm always teaching mythology and looking for new ways in, especially feminist ways into mythology. So that was just, whoa, so exciting. And also those dream photos are amazing, just incredible. The book, you call it an autobiography. So it's your autobiography through these women's stories, or are you reading their photographs as autobiographical about them? Can you talk a little bit more about memoir and autobiography?
I feel like it's autobiography for me because
Whitney, tell the story about Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas and the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas and how that gets you to your work.
Great,
well,
thank you.
I love the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas because I love the way Gertrude Stein gets to talk about herself endlessly, but through Alice. It's like, and Alice is constantly saying things like, well, yes, Gertrude's a genius. Only Gertrude could understand this. Only Gertrude this, Gertrude that. And it's so sly because it's Gertrude Stein talking, but she's kind of like, it's kind of like a puppet kind of thing. And I love that because she really figured out this incredible way to present autobiography. And it's the autobiography, of course, of Alice B. Toklas, but obviously not. And I think, and a lot of memoirs and autobiographies I like do kind of take an approach that's a little like left of center. And that really appeals to me a lot. So in this one, I felt that it was my autobiography because these are the things I love. These are the things that influenced me. These are the things that inspired me, that spoke to me. So, and I think with memoir and autobiography, autobiography generally, I think, is a life. Memoir, a lot of times can be a piece of something, it has more of a focus in that way. So I think there's that.
Well, it's just a fascinating project. And I'm so interested too in the way in which it relates to your novel, as well as then this more creative nonfiction piece. And it's been great having some of our students here, as well as followers and community members, and to learn about all of that. Do you want to say, either of you want to say anything by way of closing? I've put into the chat some links to our website, Illumination. So I loved your description of your just advice about how to experience art. And we do have students here who are kind of experiencing the arts for the first time through our program. And your idea about just like, what do you like? Just, begin with your response is such great advice. And we hope that people will come to hear Tracy K. Smith next week. And we have some other amazing activities, events, readings, exhibits, etc., coming up in the next while. Anything that you guys want to say by way of closing?
Well, maybe as a way of closing, let's have Whitney talk about her epilogue.
Yes.
The fascinating sort of manifesto, revisiting the advantages of being a woman artist, thoughts on writing, and one question. So maybe talk a little about this epilogue, which is hysterically funny also.
Yeah. Well, I have a prologue. I have a prologue and an epilogue, and they do belong with the book. They're not meant to be ignored. And I wanted to look at the Guerrilla Girls with, the things they write about, advantages of being a woman artist. And I do think that they just kind of, it is kind of funny, and I should say with the book, because it does have memoir aspects all through it too, that it kind of fits in at the end with the fusing of their art and my commentary. The prologue ends with the Montaigne quote about anyone, wasting their time reading about me. It's like, what are you doing? And the epilogue ends with Say Shonigan saying, oh my God, people are going to read my book and now they're going to know who she really is. And it's not going to be good. So I think that those things also kind of bookend it.
Beautiful. Wow. Well, my thanks to both of you for an enlightening and informative and also inspiring evening of photography and the art of writing brought together really in a very unique and special way. So
Could I say
yes, yes.
I want to say, because I did go to UCI, have my MFA from UCI, which I'm so happy about. I think that it's really great with writers when you do sort of, not just move across genres, but also different art forms and everything. I mean, I think that, and there's some writers, who just do so much with that. And I think that's a great thing to do, but not to feel so limited in the way that you're going to tell your story, if it needs to be told that way, or tell it straightforward, doesn't matter, but yeah, but it was really great being here at UCI, I have to say. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you
So much.
Well,
So-
we're thrilled.
and thank you, Julia.
My pleasure.
And thank
Okay.
you, everybody.